The year was 2347, and humanity had been a small member of the Galactic Council for almost 100 years. The elder races who had traveled the stars for thousands of years did not think much of humans. They tolerated them, sometimes laughed at them, but mostly they just ignored them. Commander Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of her starship, the Endurance. She watched the screens show the same boring patrol of the Kepler system that she had been doing for 6 months. Her crew of 47 people had gotten used to the quiet life at the edge of human space. "Nothing ever happened out here, Commander. We are getting an emergency message," said Lieutenant Danny Ortiz from his station. His voice sounded strange and tight. "It is coming from the Galactic Council's main relay station." "Show me," Lisa said. The big screen in front of her came to life, and what Lisa saw made her heart stop. The message showed the human colony of New Geneva. It was a peaceful farming world where 3 million people lived simple, happy lives. But now, Draxian warships hung in the sky above it like dark clouds. The Draxians were one of the oldest races in the Council, were tall creatures covered in scales like lizards that walked on 2 legs. They had always looked down on humans. A Draxian commander appeared on the screen. His scaled face showed something like pleasure. "Let this be a lesson to all lower species who question the Council," he said. "The humans on this world refuse to give us their mining rights. Their refusal ends now." The picture changed to show the surface of the planet. Lisa watched with growing horror as Draxian soldiers moved through the streets of the cities. They pushed civilians into the main squares. The sound of people screaming filled the bridge of the Endurance. "Oh no," whispered Katie Brennan, the ship's navigator. She put her hand over her mouth. The Draxians opened fire on the crowds. Men fell. Women fell. Children fell. Nobody was spared. The broadcast showed everything in clear detail. It cut from one killing to another across the whole planet. Buildings burned. Bodies covered the ground. 3 million voices went silent in just 4 hours. And the Galactic Council sent this broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Lisa's hands grabbed her armrest so hard that her fingers turned white. Around her, some crew members cried openly. Others stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. When the broadcast finally ended, a council spokesperson appeared. It was a thin, stick-like creature called Ambassador Sorrel, from a race called the Vethkai. "New Geneva has been dealt with," he said in a cold voice. "Let all species remember their place in the universe. The Council's word is law." The screen went black. For a long time, nobody on the bridge said anything. Then Danny Ortiz's computer started making noise. Incoming messages were flooding in, hundreds of them, then thousands. "What are they saying?" Lisa asked. Her voice came out rough and broken. Danny looked up at her. Tears ran down his face. "They are asking what we do now, Commander. They are asking if we are going to fight back." Lisa stood up slowly. She thought about her sister, who had lived on New Geneva with her husband. She thought about her 2 nieces, who had sent her funny video messages just last week. They had been 6 and 8 years old. They had loved to laugh and play. Now they were gone. All of them were gone. "Set a course for Earth," Lisa said quietly. "Maximum speed, and send a message to Fleet Command." "What should I say?" Danny asked. Lisa's eyes changed. The sadness was still there, but something else had joined it. Something hard and cold and terrible. "Tell them that the age of human patience is over." The Endurance turned and jumped into faster-than-light travel, heading for home. Across human space, the same scene was playing out on every ship, every station, and every colony. People watched the broadcast in silence. Some cried, some screamed. Some just sat in shock, unable to process what they had witnessed. But beneath the grief, something else was growing. It started small, like a spark in dry grass. Then it spread, jumping from person to person, from world to world. It was rage. On Earth, the leaders of humanity gathered in emergency sessions. Old arguments were forgotten. Political enemies shook hands. Religious differences melted away. For the first time in centuries, every single human being agreed on one thing. They would not let this stand. The Draxians had expected fear. They had expected the humans to beg for mercy, to offer whatever tribute was demanded. That was how things had always worked. The strong crushed the weak, and the weak submitted. But the Draxians had made a terrible mistake. They did not understand humans at all. In the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Sorel reviewed the reports with satisfaction. The broadcast had been sent. The message was clear. The humans would fall in line like every other species before them. "Have the humans responded to our demands?" he asked his assistant. "Not yet, Ambassador." Their representative walked out of the council chamber without speaking. Sorel waved one of his thin arms in dismissal. "They are processing their grief. Give them time. Soon they will send their surrender and offer tribute. They have no other choice." "Ambassador, there is something else. Our sensors are detecting unusual activity in human space. Their ships are gathering. Of course they are. They are scared. They are probably planning to run." Sorel made a sound that was his species' version of laughter. Where could they possibly go? The galaxy belongs to the Council. His assistant said nothing, but doubt flickered in his large eyes. Far away, on the dead world of New Geneva, ash and dust drifted in the wind. The cities that had been full of life just hours ago were now silent tombs. 3 million people had called this world home. Now only ruins remained. But among the ruins, something small moved. A tiny probe descended from orbit, no bigger than a bird. It landed softly among the debris and began to record. Its camera captured everything: the burned buildings, the empty streets, the evidence of what had happened here. The probe sent its images back to Earth in a steady stream. Every leader, every soldier, every citizen would see what the Draxians had done. They would see the proof with their own eyes, and they would remember. In her quarters on the Endurance, Lisa Harper sat alone in the darkness. She held a small picture frame in her hands. It showed her sister's family, smiling and happy on a sunny day. Her nieces wore matching dresses. Her brother-in-law had his arms around all of them. Lisa did not cry. She had no tears left. Instead, she made a promise. "I will make them pay," she whispered to the empty room. "I will make them all pay." The Endurance raced toward Earth, carrying its crew of broken hearts and burning anger. Behind them, the stars seemed to watch in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. The galaxy had seen many wars. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had seen species fight and die for 1,000 different reasons, but it had never seen anything like what was coming. The humans were going to teach the universe a lesson it would never forget. Earth had not seen such unity. In over 100 years, within 3 days of the broadcast, every nation, every colony, and every political group spoke with one voice. The arguments that had divided humanity for generations suddenly meant nothing. All that mattered now was the burning anger that every human being shared. Admiral Samuel Drake stood before the United Earth's Defense Council in Geneva, Switzerland. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of service. He had spent his whole career asking for peace and talking instead of fighting. Now, his tired eyes showed only cold determination. "The Council thinks we will give up," he said, his deep voice filling the silent room. "They showed that massacre to the whole galaxy because they thought it would scare us. They thought we would beg for mercy. They do not understand what they have done." On the screens around the room, maps showed where every human ship was moving. Every warship was being called back home. Factories that had been building cargo ships were now working day and night on something very different. "We have kept our true power hidden for many years," Drake continued. "The Council believes our technology is 100 years behind theirs. They are wrong." He brought up pictures of ships on the screen. The people in the room gasped. These ships were huge, bigger than anything the Council had ever built. They carried weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. They had engines that could travel faster than anything the elder races possessed. "We call it Project Prometheus," Drake said. "For 20 years we have been preparing for a day we hoped would never come. That day has arrived." On the other side of the world, deep under the Rocky Mountains, there was a secret base that almost nobody knew about. Chief Engineer Maria Santos walked through the massive underground space, checking on the first of the new warships. It stretched almost 3 kilometers from front to back, covered with weapons that would make the Draxians weep with fear. "Captain," Eric Dunn had been chosen to command this ship. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and calm eyes. He had never lost a battle in his career, and he did not plan to start now. "How soon can we have the whole fleet ready?" he asked Maria. She wiped oil from her hands with a rag. 6 months for the first wave, 18 months for everything. We do not have 18 months. The Council will attack us as soon as they realize we are not surrendering. Maria looked up at the enormous ship hanging above them in the underground dock. Then we will give you what we can when we cans. Her eyes were hard with determination. But Captain, when this fleet launches, the galaxy will learn that they chose the wrong people to murder. High above Mars, the human fleet that already existed gathered together. These were older ships, smaller and weaker than what was being built on Earth. But the men and women who crewed them burned with a fury that made them. Dangerous Commander Lisa Harper had been promoted to Commodore after she told the Defense Council everything she had seen. Now she spoke to the assembled captains through hologram, her image appearing on every ship. "We have received word that the Draxians are sending a punishment fleet," she reported. Her voice was steady and calm. "They expect to find us crying and scared. They expect us to surrender and pay them tribute. Instead, they will receive the first lesson in a very long education." Captain Peter Graham commanded the destroyer Vigilant. He was a young man with red hair and freckles, but his eyes held the same fire as every other human. "What about the other council races?" he asked. "Will they help the Draxians?" Lisa shook her head. "Our spies tell us that most of them are waiting to see what happens. The Vethkai have said the broadcast went too far. The Korathi have stopped talking to anyone. Only the Draxians and their allies, the Maltech, want to fight us right now." She paused and let her voice soften just a little. "We are not fighting the whole galaxy, not yet. But we are fighting for our survival and our honor. We are fighting for the 3 million people who died on New Geneva." Every captain saluted at the same time, far away. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Sorrell read the intelligence reports and felt the first tiny touch of worry. The humans had not answered the ultimatum. Their ambassador had left the council without saying a word. And now, strange reports were coming from the border. "They are gathering all their ships," his assistant told him. "Every single one." Sorrell waved his thin arm dismissively. "A few hundred primitive ships? The Draxians will destroy them easily. Ambassador, our deep space sensors are detecting things we cannot explain. Energy signatures we have never seen before. That is impossible. We know everything about human technology." The assistant said nothing. But the fear in his eyes spoke clearly. Back on Earth, in a small house in Texas, an old woman named Martha sat in front of her television. She had lost her granddaughter on New Geneva. Little Sophie had been only 5 years old, with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. Martha had cried for 3 days straight, but now her tears were dry. She watched the news reports about the fleet gathering, about the secret weapons being prepared, about the whole human race coming together for the first time in history. She did not know how to fight. She was too old to join the military, but she could do something. She went to her kitchen and started cooking. For the next several hours, she made food and packed it into boxes. Then she drove to the nearest military base and handed the boxes to the young soldiers there. "You bring those monsters down," she told them, her voice shaking but strong. "You make them pay for what they did to my Sophie." The soldiers took her food and promised they would. All across Earth, similar scenes played out. People who could not fight found other ways to help. They worked in factories. They donated money. They took care of the families of soldiers who had been called to duty. An entire species came together with a single purpose. The Draxians had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power instead. They had taught humanity a lesson about unity. Admiral Drake stood alone in his office late one night, looking out at the stars. He had spent his life believing that peace was always better than war. He had argued against building the secret weapons, against preparing for a fight that might never come. Now he was glad he had lost those arguments. "They killed children," he whispered to the darkness. "They murdered 3 million innocent people and laughed about it." He turned away from the window and walked to his desk. A single picture sat there, showing his own grandchildren playing in a garden. They were safe on Earth, but if the Draxians had their way, no human child would ever be safe anywhere. Drake picked up his communicator and called the fleet commanders. "Begin final preparations," he ordered. "We move in 6 months." In the darkness of space, between the stars, the first of the new warships slipped out of Earth's hidden shipyards. It was smaller than the main fleet would be, but it was still more powerful than anything the Draxians had ever faced. The ship's name was painted on its side, in bold letters, UES Retribution. The crew sat at their stations, running through their final checks. They knew they might not survive what was coming. They did not care. Every single one of them had lost someone on New Geneva. Every single one of them was ready to die for revenge. The galaxy had no idea what was about to happen. The humans were coming, and they were bringing fire. The Draxian punishment. Fleet entered human space with all the confidence of hunters who had never known what it felt like to be prey. 30 warships, each one supposedly centuries more advanced than anything humans could build. Admiral Voronek commanded from his flagship, the Wrath of Draxus, and he was already writing the victory message he would send to the Council. Primitive species always fight back at first, he said to his officers, showing his sharp teeth and what passed for a smile among his kind. They will learn to obey, or they will die. Either way, the Council wins. His tactical officer looked up from his screen with a confused expression. "Admiral, we are detecting human ships ahead. They appear to be waiting for us." Voronek's scales rippled with amusement. "How many 12 ships, Admiral?" "Small cruisers, by our standards. They send 12 ships against 30. Voronek leaned back in his command chair and made a sound of disgust. "Either their commanders are stupid, or this is some kind of protest. Destroy them. Leave one alive to tell others what happened here." The Draxian fleet moved forward without caution. They did not bother with defensive formations. Why would they? This was not going to be a battle. This was going to be target practice. But what happened next would be studied in military schools across the galaxy for hundreds of years. Commodore Lisa Harper watched the Draxian fleet coming toward her on the tactical display. Her 12 ships floated motionless in space, looking exactly like what the Draxians expected. Old, weak, outmatched, desperate. "They are taking the bait," reported Commander Danny Ortiz, who now served as her second in command. "No defensive formations. They think this will be easy. Let them think that for a little longer." Lisa's hand hovered over her control panel. "All ships, hold your positions. Wait for my signal." The Draxian fleet came within weapons range. Voronek gave the order to fire. 30 ships released their plasma weapons at the human formation. Every single shot missed. The shots did not just fail to hit their targets. They passed through empty space where the human ships had been a tiny fraction of a second before. The 12 human vessels had simply moved. They were faster than Draxian sensors could follow, faster than their targeting computers could handle. "What is happening?" Voronek demanded, his scales turning pale with shock. Before anyone could answer, the human ships struck back. Beams of energy unlike anything in the Council's records cut through. Draxian shields like they were made of paper. 3 warships died in the first attack, their hulls torn apart by weapons that should not have existed. The humans moved again, appearing behind the Draxian formation, firing another deadly volley. 2 more ships exploded in balls of fire. "Shoot back!" "All ships, shoot back!" Voronek screamed, but his fleet was falling apart. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, dancing through the Draxian formation like ghosts, leaving burning wreckage behind with every pass. On the bridge of the Endurance, Lisa Harper felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Focus all weapons on the flagship. It is time for the Admiral to understand what is happening to him." The Wrath of Draxus shook as human weapons tore through its defenses. Voronek watched in disbelief as his tactical display filled with damage warnings. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Draxian fleet, was being taken apart piece by a species he had called primitive. "Admiral," his communications officer shouted, We are receiving a message from the human commander. Lisa Harper's face appeared on the Draxian view screen. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. Admiral Voronok, she said quietly, I had family on New Geneva, 2 nieces. They were 6 and 8 years old. I want you to remember that as you die. The Endurance's main weapons fired. The wrath of Draxus came apart in a bloom of fire and twisted metal. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Of the 30 Draxian warships, only 4 survived to escape into faster-than-light travel. Lisa let them go. She wanted survivors. She wanted the Council to know exactly what had happened. Commodore, Danny said softly, his voice heavy with grief, we lost the Vigilant. Captain Graham is dead. He crashed his ship into a Draxian cruiser to stop it from escaping. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. Peter Graham had been a good man and a brave officer. He was the first to die in a war that would take many more lives before it was over. Record his sacrifice, she ordered, and set course for the meeting point. The real fleet will be ready soon. In the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Sorrell watched recordings of the battle over and over again. His thin body trembled. His assistant stood beside him, equally terrified. They destroyed 26 warships in 11 minutes, the assistant whispered. With 12 ships? Just 12. Sorrell's mind raced. The Council had built its power on the belief that no species could ever challenge the elder races. That belief had just died alongside Admiral Voronok. Call an emergency meeting, Sorrell ordered. We need to respond before the humans do something we cannot stop. But it was already too late for that, deep beneath Earth's surface. The first of the Prometheus-class dreadnoughts powered up its massive engines. Captain Eric Dunn sat in his command chair, watching his crew run through their final preparations. Every person on the bridge had lost someone on New Geneva. Every person was ready. All systems are working perfectly, Maria Santos reported from the engineering section. She is ready, Captain. Dunn looked at the name painted on the hull, visible through the cameras in the launch bay. It read, U.S. Retribution. Take us out, he ordered. Earth is calling us to war. The Retribution rose from its hidden dock and climbed toward the stars. Behind it, more ships were powering up, preparing to follow. The secret fleet that humanity had built was finally coming out of hiding. Across human space, the news of the Battle of First Blood spread like wildfire. People who had been scared suddenly felt hope. People who had wanted to surrender suddenly wanted to fight. The images of Draxian ships exploding, of human vessels moving with impossible speed and grace, played on every screen, on the colony world of New Hope. A young boy named Tommy watched the footage with wide eyes. His father had died on New Geneva, visiting relatives when the attack came. For months, Tommy had felt nothing but pain and fear. Now, watching the human ships tear the Draxians apart, he felt something new, pride. We are going to win, he said to his mother, who sat beside him with tears running down her face. We are really going to win. His mother hugged him tight and said nothing. She wanted to believe he was right. In the ruins of New Geneva, the small recording probe continued its work. It captured images of the dead cities, the empty streets, the evidence of genocide. It sent everything back to Earth, where the images were stored in a special database. Humanity would never forget what had been done to them. And now, the galaxy was learning that humans did not forget their enemies either. Admiral Drake received the battle report on his personal communicator. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. 12 ships had destroyed 26. The Draxians had been helpless against human technology. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. That was just the beginning, he said to himself. Wait until they see what comes next. Outside his window, more ships were launching from Earth's orbital stations. The sky was filled with the lights of engines firing, of vessels taking their places in formation. The largest military force in human history was coming. Together, the Draxians had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about weakness. Now humanity was going to teach the Draxians a lesson about strength, and the tuition was going to be paid in blood. 6 months after the Battle of First Blood, The human fleet emerged from the darkness of space like a nightmare made real. 47 Prometheus-class dreadnoughts led the way, each one capable of destroying an entire Draxian battle group by itself. Behind them came hundreds of smaller ships, carriers filled with fighters, destroyers ready for close combat, and supply vessels carrying everything an army needed for a long war. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it had only one purpose. Admiral Samuel Drake commanded from the flagship U.S. Defiance. Watching the fleet form up for the attack on Draxian space, Commodore Lisa Harper stood beside him, serving as his second-in-command. Her eyes held the same cold fire they had carried since the day she watched New Geneva burn. The Karathi have declared they will not take sides, Lisa reported, reading the latest diplomatic messages. The Vethkai are begging the Council to negotiate peace. The Maltec are building defenses along their borders. Drake asked. They are gathering everything they have. Our spies say their military strength is around 400 warships. Drake allowed himself a thin smile. They are about to learn that numbers do not mean everything. He gave the order, and the human fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel. They came out of the jump in the heart of the Draxian home system. The planet Draxus Prime hung below them, beautiful world of blue oceans and green continents where billions of Draxians lived. The human fleet surrounded it like a crown of steel and fire. The Draxian defense fleet scrambled to protect their homeworld. 200 warships, representing thousands of years of military power, formed a defensive wall between the humans and their planet. Supreme Commander Taranok was the highest military leader in the Draxian Empire. He stared at his sensor screens in shock. The human ships were enormous, far larger than anything in his fleet. Their energy readings were beyond anything his computers could measure, and they had appeared without warning, bypassing every defense system and alarm. Incoming message from the human flagship, his communications officer reported. The young Draxian's voice trembled with fear. Admiral Drake appeared on the Draxian view screen. His weathered face showed no anger, no satisfaction, only the cold determination of a man who had come to collect a debt. Supreme Commander Taranok, Drake said formally, you are ordered to shut down your fleet and surrender without conditions. Your leaders will be put on trial for crimes against humanity. Your military will be taken apart. Your colonies will be placed under human control. You have 1 hour to obey. Taranok's scales flushed dark with rage. You dare threaten the Draxian Empire? We are a founding race of the Council. We have ruled the stars for 10,000 years. You murdered 3 million of our people and sent the recording across the galaxy. Drake's voice never rose above a calm, steady tone. Your time is finished. 1 hour. The screen went black. For 47 minutes, the Draxian leaders argued among themselves. The old commanders wanted to fight, certain that their greater numbers would win the day. The younger officers, who had studied what happened at First Blood, knew better. They begged their superiors to surrender in the end. Pride won over wisdom. The Draxian fleet attacked. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The Prometheus-class dreadnoughts opened fire with weapons that made the armaments used at First Blood look like toys. Entire Draxian battlecruisers disappeared in single shots. The energy shields that had protected Draxian ships for thousands of years failed within seconds. Human vessels moved with impossible speed and precision, their crews fighting with a cold fury that no Draxian could understand. Captain Eric Dunn drove the Retribution straight into the center of the Draxian formation. His crew worked in perfect harmony, each person knowing exactly what to do. Target their command ships, he ordered. Break their chain of command. The Draxian command carrier Pride of the Empire exploded as the Retribution's main weapons found their mark. Around it, the Draxian formation began to fall apart as officers panicked and discipline collapsed. Ships started to flee in every direction, but there was nowhere to run. The human fleet was everywhere. On the Defiance, Admiral Drake watched the destruction unfold on his tactical display. Part of him, the part that had spent decades calling for peace, felt sick at the scale of the killing. But another part, the part that had watched the New Geneva broadcast and seen the bodies of children in the streets, felt only grim satisfaction. Sir, Lisa said quietly. The Draxian flagship is signaling surrender. Drake nodded slowly. Accept the surrender, but only from ships that power down immediately. Any ship that keeps fighting will be destroyed. One by one, the surviving Draxian ships went dark. Their weapons powered off. Their engines stopped. Of the 200 warships that had tried to defend their homeworld, fewer than 60 remained. The rest were debris, floating in the light of the Draxian sun. The human fleet moved into orbit around Draxus Prime. Below, billions of Draxians looked up at the sky and saw their future. They had been the masters of the galaxy. Now they were the conquered admiral. Drake's voice echoed across every communication channel on the planet. People of Draxus Prime, 6 months ago. Your government murdered 3 million innocent humans and showed their deaths to the entire galaxy. They believed we were weak. They believed we would bow down and obey. They were wrong. He paused, letting the words sink into every Draxian mind. We could destroy your world the same way you destroyed ours. We could pay back massacre with massacre. That is what your leaders expected, because that is what they would have done. But humanity is not Draxus. We do not murder innocent people. We do not broadcast genocide for entertainment. On the surface, Draxians who had cheered when New Geneva burned now wept in terror and shame. Your military leaders will face justice for their crimes. Your government will be changed. But your civilians will not be hurt. Remember this when you rebuild your society. Remember that the species you tried to destroy showed you mercy that you never would have shown them. The broadcast ended in the Galactic Council chambers. Ambassador Sorrel watched the images from Draxus with something close to religious terror. The elder races, the species that had controlled the galaxy for millennia, sat in shocked silence around him. The humans had not just won. They had won with casual ease, destroying one of the Council's founding races in a matter of hours, and then they had shown mercy when none was expected. What do we do? The Maltec ambassador whispered. Sorrel had no answer. He had spent his entire career believing that power was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. Now a species from a small blue planet had shown him something he had never considered. Power was not just about the ability to destroy. True. Power was the ability to destroy and then choose not to. On the surface of Draxus Prime, Draxian civilians emerged from their homes to find human soldiers standing guard over their streets. The soldiers did not attack. They did not steal. They handed out food and medical supplies to people who had expected death. A young Draxian child approached one of the human soldiers. A woman named Sergeant Kelly Monroe. The child's scales were pale with fear. Are you going to kill us? The child asked. Kelly knelt down to the child's level. She thought about New Geneva. She thought about the human children who had died there. She could have hated this Draxian child. She could have blamed it for what its species had done. Instead, she smiled gently. No, she said, we are not going to kill you. We are going to help you build something better. The child stared at her in confusion. This was not how conquered people were supposed to act. This was not how the galaxy worked, but maybe, Kelly thought, as she stood up and returned to her duties. It was time for the galaxy to learn a new way. The war for revenge was over. The war for the future of civilization was just beginning. 1 year after the fall of Draxus, the galaxy looked completely different. The Galactic Council still existed, but everything about it had changed. The Draxian seats sat empty. Their empire broken apart, and their former territories now controlled by a joint human-Karathi peacekeeping force. The Maltec had surrendered without firing a single shot after watching what happened to the Draxians. Several smaller races that had been pushed around by the Council for centuries had openly sided with humanity, and at the center of it all, where a dozen elder races had once controlled the fate of every species in known space, humans now sat as permanent members. Ambassador Catherine Mills was the first human to hold such a high position in galactic politics. She was young for the job, not yet 40 years old. But the war had made all of humanity grow up faster than time alone ever could. She stood before the assembled delegates and spoke with quiet confidence. The old system was built on fear and cruelty, she said, her voice reaching every corner of the vast chamber. Species were ranked by how much power they had. They were controlled through violence. They were punished for any sign of independence. That system is dead now. Act. Around her, delegates from hundreds of worlds listened in complete silence. They had all seen recordings of what human weapons could do. They had all heard the stories of the Battle of Draxus Prime. What we are offering is something new. A true federation of equals, where no species is called superior or inferior. Where arguments are settled through talking instead of genocide. Where the strong protect the weak instead of crushing them. The Vethkai ambassador spoke up. His spindly body trembled slightly. What if a species refuses to join? What if they wish to remain independent? Catherine smiled gently. Then they remain independent. We are not here to build another empire. We are here to make sure that what happened to New Geneva can never happen again to anyone. On Earth, the celebrations that had followed victory had long since faded into something quieter. People were not interested in parties anymore. They wanted to build. They wanted to create. The shipyards that had produced weapons of war now built exploration vessels, designed to discover new worlds. The scientists who had created weapons capable of destroying fleets now worked on ways to make dead planets come alive again. Medical advances that had been developed for soldiers were now being shared freely with any species that wanted. Them, Admiral Samuel Drake had retired to a small house by the ocean in Maine. He spent his days fishing and trying not to think about the faces of the commanders he had killed. Sometimes Commodore Lisa Harper came to visit, and they would sit together in silence, two warriors who had done terrible things for necessary reasons. Do you think we made the right choice? Lisa asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the Atlantic Ocean. Drake was quiet for a long time. I think we did what we had to do. Whether it was right or wrong, that is for history to decide. Lisa nodded slowly. She understood what he meant. They had won the war, but winning had cost them pieces of their souls that they would never get back. On the world that had once been called New Geneva. The rebuilding had finally begun. The planet had been given a new name, Memorial, where 3 million people had died. A vast monument now stood carrying every name, every face. Every story that could be recovered from the ashes. Humans from across the galaxy made trips there to pay their respects. They came to remember what had been lost and to understand what had been won. Captain Eric Dunn stood before the monument. Reading the names of people he had never met but had avenged with fire and blood, the Retribution floated in orbit above, now serving as a memorial ship herself. Her weapons had been removed. She would never fight again, remember, he said quietly, speaking the words that had become humanity's promise since the war ended. And we endure. Ow. In the rebuilt city around him, children played in parks that had once been killing grounds. Families built homes on soil that had been soaked with the blood of innocents. Life was returning to a world that the Draxians had meant to stay dead forever, far across the galaxy. In the halls where the new Galactic Federation held its meetings, Ambassador Mills finished her speech and took her seat. Around her, delegates from 100 worlds clapped. Some clapped with real enthusiasm. Others clapped because they were afraid not to. All of them understood that the universe had changed in ways that could never be undone. The humans had been pushed to the edge of extinction. They had looked into the face of genocide and responded not with surrender, but with fury. They had broken an empire that had lasted 10,000 years. And then, when they could have burned everything to the ground, they had offered mercy to the people who had tried to murder them. They had done what everyone thought was impossible, and now, as humanity took its place among the stars, the galaxy was learning to live with a simple truth. The species that everyone had once laughed at, the newcomers who had been mocked and threatened and finally attacked, had become the most powerful force in known space. Not through cruelty, not through empire building, but through an unbreakable will to protect their own people and the wisdom to show restraint when they had already won. Ambassador Sorrell watched from the gallery above the main floor. After a year of watching the humans, he finally understood what made them different from the Draxians and all the elder races that had ruled before. The humans fought for survival, not conquest. They showed mercy because they were strong, not because they were weak, and they would never, ever forget what had been done to them. On a quiet evening in the rebuilt capital city of Memorial, a young girl named Hannah placed flowers at the base of the great monument. Her grandmother had survived the massacre by hiding in a collapsed building for 3 days. Her grandmother's sister had not been so lucky. Hannah looked up at the stars above her. She watched the ships passing overhead, the vessels of 100 different species all flying together under the flag of the new Federation. She thought about the galaxy that her people now helped to lead. "We remember," she whispered, "and we endure." The wind picked up her words and carried them across the monument, across the planet, across the endless darkness of space itself. It was a promise to the dead and a warning to anyone who might threaten humanity again. The Draxians had tried to break the human spirit with cruelty and murder. They had expected fear and submission. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. They had united an entire species. They had forced humans to discover just how strong they really were, and they had taught the galaxy that some sleeping giants should never be awakened. The old order of the galaxy was gone forever. In its place, something new was being born. Something built not on fear and domination, but on cooperation and mutual respect. It would not be perfect. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts to resolve, wounds that would take generations to heal. But for the first time in galactic history, there was real hope that different species could live together as equals, and at the heart of that hope stood humanity. The small species from a tiny blue planet, the people who had been dismissed as primitive and weak, the survivors of genocide who had risen from the ashes to reshape the entire galaxy. They had been pushed to the brink of destruction. They had fought back with everything they had, and they had one. Not just a war, but a chance to build a better future for everyone. The stars shone down on Memorial, on Earth, on all the worlds where humans now lived and worked and dreamed. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on ships and stations scattered across 1,000 light years, men and women looked up at those same stars and smiled. They had earned their place among them, and they would hold it forever.